Morning and welcome to episode 3 now of Culture Over Coffee with myself, Craig Stewart from Dalebrook Media. I've been having a really good time doing these conversations in the lead up to our Culture Cafe event, just trying to get some insight from various people into the world of culture, employee experience, and our topic for today really is health and well-being. And joining me from the UK, where I believe it's really good weather, and we've certainly hit autumn here in Joburg, is Simon Spurr, who's the MD and Director of Alula Technology. Simon, how's it going? Thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, morning, Craig. Yeah, thanks. Good to chat on this lovely morning from London, and looking forward to the conversation with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kick off, Culture Over Coffee, name of the video series that we're doing. What is your relationship with coffee?
Well, I think it's an integral part of my day. I must be honest. I think every morning needs to have a cup of coffee in my world. It's part of that journey of kind of waking up to wake up, but also part of the culture of having meetings, whether it's virtual or in person. So, I come from a coffee-loving family, but I think the UK is definitely a coffee-loving society. So, yeah, it's a good start to the day.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's my first port of call in the mornings is a double espresso to get going. I saw a T-shirt. I was doing a run the other day, and some guy was wearing a T-shirt that said, I don't need coffee to wake up. I wake up to have coffee. And I kind of feel I'm kind of in that mode. Simon, let's get into the sort of teeth of it. But first, maybe just an introduction into yourself and Alula Technologies. We've got people that would watch this coming from a marketing space, a data space, and obviously an HR and culture environment. Maybe not that familiar with Alula. So yeah, perhaps give us a bit of insight.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Craig. So maybe just by way of personal background, so I've been in the health, well-being, and really risk management space for most of my career. I've spent 20 plus years now in health insurance, life insurance, employee benefits, design and rewards programs. So my working career, or corporate career, was spent in discovery and then in Aon. So working on both sides of the fence in terms of health insurance, product design, rewards and benefits, and then within a global risk manager like Aon in terms of human capital risk management. Again, so looking at employee well-being, overall shaping of design around products that can manage and understand risk in a better way. I then founded a business in South Africa about 10 years ago, which set out really to bring data together in a meaningful way. So our whole strategy and hypothesis was built on the fact that data, particularly in the healthcare space, is very disconnected. It's disjointed and fragmented. Consumers struggle to understand their health record or have access to it, to the point that it's very difficult for kind of the whole stakeholder journey in terms of understanding what's happening in someone's healthcare journey. So we set out to build a data platform that can pull data into a single stream, into a platform, and then apply intelligence to that. So the business itself has been running for almost 10 years now. We were acquired by a small London-based private equity firm about 2 years ago. So hence my move to the UK. We've rebranded. There were 2 acquisitions that happened in parallel. So the business that I founded called Health Cloud and another business called Silverbridge were acquired, and then a new brand formed in the UK called Alula. So I head up the health vertical of Alula, based here, very much still a strong focus on the South African markets, and with a strong operational presence there. This is really our management team who are seeking to grow into other markets.
Cool. Thanks for that. All right, so you talked there a lot about obviously the data side of things, risk, etc., but really touched on the employee health and well-being aspect of everyday corporate life. And this is something through the research that I've done of late leading up to Culture Cafe. Health and well-being, I guess, ironically, strangely, is kind of only coming to the fore now. And I think maybe COVID kind of drove the awareness around the impact of, work stresses, life stresses, etc., on employees who are ultimately humans. They're not just robots or anything like that. So that really needs to be looked after. What would you say is kind of the driving factor behind this? Because if you think maybe, to our parents back in the day, it was really just work. We don't really care how people feel. Obviously, that's changed a hell of a lot over time. What do you think has kind of given so much sort of awareness to employee health and well-being these days?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think driven by a few factors. I think we live in a digital world where everyone is hyper connected and always on. So between your mobile phone and your gadgets, whether you're connected to your laptop or your PC working experience, or even within your home now within smart TVs, etc. We're pretty much living in an environment where we're always on. There's in some ways an expectation to be connected to your work experience, and I think that's mostly driven through the fact that we've had this changing world of in-person or kind of physical working environments to hybrid or work from home. And we saw a big shift, obviously with the COVID pandemic, where, we, not to talk about that specifically, but we saw a massive population having to work from home and having to readjust their normal working day. And then right through the pandemic, some of the issues that have emerged now and new data are starting to show what the real impact is to people having to work from home, and the influx of, or let's call it, issues that have arisen from COVID itself. So, I think there's this growing population of a changing work environment based on those factors, but also the fact that there's, a number of people who either have been ill and have taken time off work, have been home-based, who are now readjusting to a hybrid or going back to the workplace environment. And, there's a rising issue of chronic disease, which is a global phenomenon. So I think all of these have a role in terms of the employee health and well-being world. We're seeing some really interesting patterns now. Again, as I say, the data is probably now really starting to come to the fore post-COVID, and the reality is now starting to sink in terms of some of those real statistics. The number of people who haven't actually returned back to a working environment. Whether it's long COVID or mental health issues, there's a big population of people who simply haven't returned to any working environment. So yeah, I think it's a combination of things, and we live in a very interesting time, right? I think it's moved very quickly, but that doesn't detract from the fact that there are some serious health issues that need to be addressed.
And I'm glad you brought up the always on point. It's something I've been thinking about in the lead up to this call, because obviously you have digital tools, etc. There's there's Teams, which we're on now. That's WhatsApp. People don't have the ability typically to switch off, and I think there's this temptation. Even if you're on your phone in the evenings, you might be scrolling Instagram or whatever it may be. I might pop onto LinkedIn, then I'm going to check my Teams. I might check my email. So it's not always the employer's fault. I mean, it may not be the culture where there's this constant drive, but as humans, and obviously this sort of doom scrolling type scenario, people are always so tempted to constantly check their emails, and then they can't switch off even if they don't respond to the email. How is that or how are you seeing that sort of managed from a culture perspective? I think it's in Portugal now, and I think it's coming in Australia or something like that, where employers actually can't reach their employees after 5 o'clock in the evening or something, and over weekends as well, which is a great step. Doesn't actually prevent the employee from looking at their emails. But how have you kind of seen this employee health and well-being tied to the culture of organizations? All well kind of saying it like, don't, guys, it's your choice, don't go onto your phones in the evenings. But how does it kind of create that culture within an organization to not be always on and actually be able to step back, refresh, come back the next day charging?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I think really for me it's about striking a balance. And I think it's not all negative or bad. I think there's an immediate connotation to thinking that you're always connected and always on, as we say, as a bad connotation. It not necessarily is. I think what this has opened up is an opportunity for employees to work when they can and when they're more productive. So I think typically we've seen this shift where maybe the traditional work environment would have been your 9 to 5 or your 8 to 4 or whatever that typical working hour would be. We now live in an environment where people can be super productive when they need to be, and they have the flexibility to work on and off. Obviously, that depends on the level of employment that you're in, or the role of your job. But I do think it opens up a really good opportunity for people to work when they can and be productive when they need to be. Now, I think the culture that we have within Alula, and something that we actively shape and manage very progressively, is it's about managing expectation in terms of when you need to be working and not. But if you have other daily roles, taking kids to school, or managing doctor's appointments, these things interfere with your life. And in a typical standard working environment, it's always difficult to get away and do those things. If you have the ability to be flexible in terms of your working time, you can manage that better. So I think it's about the balance. Look, a lot of that is discretionary in terms of, I think it's up to the individual to put down some parameters and some boundaries in terms of that. And I think employers should not expect employees to be, on all the time or connected all the time. But striking the balance is really important.
And I think it's that balance between performance. I think, companies these days typically want to do more with less resources, headcounts, etc. So employees are getting pushed really, really hard. But at the same time, it's this culture of, we want to support you from a mental health perspective, physical health perspective, but at the same time, we expect you to be really, really focused, driven, high performance, etc. Harder targets, maybe taking on the work of 1.5 people as opposed to just yourself. How do companies manage that challenge? You talk there about striking the balance. Maybe kind of talk about sort of the digital tools and things that you guys work with, to kind of manage that and get people to take a step back and just breathe, even if it's just a 5-minute walk away from the laptop, whatever it may be, and just kind of recharge and then kind of come back in.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to kind of add to what I mentioned before, I think it's really important, as you've just described there, is people do need to take a break and switch off. I think this, typically the way that we work and speak to each other and engage virtually like we're talking now, you could tend to stack your day full of meetings like this and actually not take that break out. I think it's really important, again, that you do need to structure something in your day when whatever works, excuse me, whatever works for you as an individual. And I think employers, again, should be relatively flexible in terms of that level of understanding. I mean, in terms of digital tools, I mean, this is now, it's evolved so significantly. I think we live in a very exciting era where there's an influx of digitization, which can support both the employer and the employee. Obviously, selecting these and working with them in the right way is critical. But, just kind of typical examples. I mean, again, the way we're talking now, these virtual platforms where you can consult with employees anywhere around the world. You don't necessarily need to be based, in the same city anymore. Working with different time zones, right through to AI technologies that can support capturing your notes or helping with code implementation. So, we use a number of Microsoft tools that help our development team and actual coders with supporting some of the automation that would take a lot longer. So there's optimization that can be implemented into the workforce, I think, which from a technology perspective is really exciting.
All right. And one of the things that we sort of talked about in the prep for this, and one of the things we want to cover is the role of technology and digital tools in supporting preventative health. Obviously preventing things onset later down the line. Maybe talk a bit about that, and maybe also some of the metrics you've seen in terms of change, if you've kind of got to that point yet. We've kind of said, for the companies that we're working with, typically had a lot of absenteeism, sick days, all that sort of thing, and that has actually decreased through the use of the tool, because it's all well and good having the tool if people don't engage with it properly and actually follow the steps, etc. It's not really going to have much of an impact on the organization. So maybe just tell us a little bit about the tool, but then also what sort of improvements in health long term have people seen that are using the tool with their employees?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, again, I think this is a really exciting time now, particularly for employers who are looking to manage things like absenteeism, sick leave, the real impact of health issues within their workforce. I mean, if you think of the typical way that an employer would create their employee benefit design, is changing significantly, and for the right reasons. It really needs to. If you consider a typical program, particularly a large employer, you would have an insurance typically in place for a population or for your whole workforce, whether it's health and or life, pension schemes. You would have things like some kind of corporate wellness program, typically an EAP assistance, employee assistance programs. right through to things like on-site provision of care, doctors, occupational health, depending on the industry. And I think the part of the challenge that employers have had there is that they're faced with this benefit design that's really unstructured and doesn't consolidate or doesn't really talk to each other. So part of the world that we live in here at Alula, and particularly some of the health tools that we built, start to connect some of those services together. We use technology to understand risk from a health perspective, whether it's looking at your physical activity by bringing wearables. So you've got a wearable on your arm. There's a growing population of people who want to track and trend their health status. So we bring this physical data realm together with mental health data, so your stress levels, and then some clinical parameters. So looking at things like blood pressure and how are your actual clinical metrics tracking and trending over time. So we bring this data into a world that helps employers understand what's going on in the employee's life, and then really importantly is we work with employers to understand where they need to focus more, from a benefit design. So are we seeing a trend of people with potential cardiovascular disease risk? Do we see a mental health spike in certain areas of a business? And then it's working with these digital tools and the data reporting that sits behind it to actually start making recommendations there. So, again, I think it's to your point, to the question around how do we see that shifting positively. The digitization really opens up a new realm of being able to understand health. And I think if you kind of bring this together into a meaningful way that employers can use, then there's definitely a way to be able to track and monitor and then assess. So it's exciting. I think the technology's evolved significantly, and employees are starting to see the value in engaging with that and having something that's more personal for them. Again, I think the world has shifted from this one-size-fits-all type of employee benefit design and engagement tool.
All right, you talked there a lot about sort of collecting data on employees' mental health, performance, stress levels, probably hours worked, all that sort of thing. It's great to get all this data. You get the analytics based on it. Are you seeing companies actually taking action from that insights? We do a lot of events in the data space, and not necessarily related to employees, but it's always about, okay, well, we've got the insights. Do we actually take action? Are you seeing now that companies are actually taking action based on the insights that you're given, or is it kind of like, oh, he'll be fine? He just needs a holiday. That sort of old school sort of level of thing, especially so many management levels that kind of come from that background, right? They kind of grew up through organizations was like, suck it up, get it done. Are you seeing people actually change, or organizations changing their attitude towards, especially from, I guess, a point of view of an employer value proposition, employer brand, attracting talent? We're a high performance business, but we care about you as a human. It's a very loaded question. I have a tendency to ask very long questions, but you can't get the idea. They're actually using the data to go, we've got to make some changes here.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I think there's a seismic shift now in the value that employers actually receive from their services that they offer to their employees. So I think typically, and again, this is a very general view, but if you look at an employer, you may have some services in place. You may have an extensive offering of benefit services in place. These cost money. Are they utilized in the best possible way? Are you able to really track return on investment in terms of these programs? Those are very difficult, challenging questions to ask in a traditional environment. I think we come at it from a world where if you can start bringing the data together into a meaningful place and you can actually see some actionable insights in terms of that, employers are definitely starting to make some changes, even if it's whether small adjustments. I'll take an example. You have an EAP, specifically for mental, physiological and psychosocial issues in your workforce. Are you actually getting the right engagement you need there? Is it being utilized? What do you need to do to get utilization up to a better point? Do you start looking at things like employee incentivization, whatever that means, for you as an employer? Do you need to start screening your employees because there's a high risk element? So when you have the data and it's presented in a meaningful way and it's digestible and understandable, and you have the engagement from the employee, there's definitely insights that are starting to be actioned, and we're starting to see a shift towards that. So it's both from not only a return on investment in terms of what employers are spending, but it's coming from the employee now more than ever, because people are self-tracking and wanting to understand their own health. So, the combination of both, I think, open up this new world of reporting and action.
All right, perfect. And Simon, maybe just in closing, if you can give the people listening and watching sort of, I guess, 3 key steps, action points, ideas, etc., to look after their own health, but their employees' health as well. Obviously, one being the technology, but what are maybe some of the key takeaways we can close off with?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, we've covered quite a bit of this, and I think there's a few things from an employer perspective. I think it's that I don't want to say complete flexibility, but I think it's this world now we live in where your employees, should and can have access to digital tools to be able to be productive, as and when they need to be. I think we've shifted away from this traditional working hour day, as I mentioned. I think that there's, as a second point, I think there's more that employers could be doing to look after their employees. Now, that sounds very general, but there are a number of tools and solutions out in the markets that can support that. I think, again, we've shifted from a slightly more traditional world of ticking boxes, of, offering certain things to our employees to, there's some real solutions that can add value. And whether it's just a cost benefit analysis or whether it actually will bring real value to you, I think those need to be assessed in a better way. And then from an employee perspective, I think it's really about trying to balance your workday. We're seeing growing prevalence of mental health issues and stress levels within the working world. We're seeing a number of people who are sick, who are known sick, who are now not working, but also there's this very big population of people who don't know that they're ill. So I think this culture of wanting to and understanding a little bit more about your own personal health needs to be kind of pushed a little bit harder, whether that's as simple as doing a little bit more exercise or being mindful of what you eat, right through to managing your stress. I think employees need to start considering and kind of looking at tools to support their own mental and physical health.
Good stuff. Simon, thank you so much for your time and the insight. I think it's such an important topic. I'm glad that it's on the rise. I'm glad that we could have this conversation and just throw a little bit more light on it. I like how you kind of talked there about it's not just the employer's responsibility, it's the employee's responsibility as well, to look after their health, know where they're at from a mental and physical health point of view, from a overreaching point of view, etc. So definitely burden, I think, falls on both sides, but glad to know that companies are actually taking a bit more of a stance on this.
Yeah, absolutely. Great chatting to you. Thanks, Craig.
All right. Thanks, Simon. Keep well.
All the best. Cheers.
Bye. Bye. Cool.